In this video, we are going to have a look at how to factorize 4 terms using grouping. In the previous few videos, we had a look at 4 different methods for factorization. Firstly, you always have to look out for a biggest common factor. This method works for any number of terms. When there are 2 terms, you have the option of doing difference between squares and sum or difference between 2 cubes. And the type you use will be determined by whether the terms are perfect squares or perfect cubes. And lastly, we had a look at how to factorize a trinomial. And in this video, we are going to have a look at a method that can help you factorize 4 or more terms, and we call this grouping. We are going to focus on 4 terms. Example 1. Factorize. Here we have 4 terms, and even though there are factors that are common for 2 of them at a time, there is no factor that is a common factor for all terms. That is why we are now going to use our newest method, grouping. We are going to form 2 groups with 2 terms in each, and your aim with these groups will be that the 2 new terms that you form have a common factor. I will show you 2 different options of groups. Your first option will be to put the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms in groups. If you now focus on the first group, you will see that these 2 terms have a as a common factor. Once you remove a from these 2 terms, you are left with x plus 3. Similarly, if you focus on the second group, you will see that these terms have 2 as a common factor. These 2 groups that are form 2 new terms, and that is why it is very important that your second common factor that you remove is always accompanied by a sign, and here that will be plus 2. Once the 2 is removed, you will be left with x plus 3. And now we have 2 terms, and these 2 terms have a common factor. Our first term have the factors a and x plus 3. Our second term is formed by the factors 2 times x plus 3. Therefore, the common factor is x plus 3. If I now go and remove this common factor of x plus 3, in my first term I'll be left with a once I've divided by x plus 3, and in my second term I'm left with 2. And here we now have one term consisting of 2 factors, which means we've factorized. You could also have chosen to put ax and 2x in the same group because they both have an x, and then your second group would be 3a plus 6. In my first group, the common factor is now x, and once removed I'm left with a plus 2, and in my second group the common factor is 3, and I'll also be left with a plus 2. So now once again we have 2 terms with a common factor, but this time that common factor is a plus 2. And once removed, I'm left with x in the first term and plus 3 in the second term. And here you can see that both options end up giving you the same 2 factors. Example 2. Factorize. Once again, here we have 4 terms, and there's no common factor for all 4 of them at once. And that is why we will do grouping. I will once again choose to group the first 2 terms together and the last 2 terms together. In my first group, the common factor is x squared. Once I've removed x squared, I'll be left with 2x minus 3. In my second group, the common factor is 3. And I'm reminding you that for your second common factor, you should always add a sign, and that means I will have plus 3. And when I remove plus 3, I will be left inside the bracket with minus 2x plus 3. If I now have a look at these two terms that we formed, there's no common factor yet, but these two brackets are very similar. This can easily be solved. If I want both brackets to be 2x minus 3, I would want to change my second bracket by changing the sign of both the minus 2x and the plus 3. This can be done by taking out a minus as a common factor, and this will change my common factor to minus 3. You can also combine these first two steps and immediately realize that when you have a negative first term for your second group, you can always take out a minus as part of your common factor. Next, if I focus on the two new terms, I have a common factor of 2x minus 3. Once removed, I'm left with x squared in the first term and minus 3 in the second term. Once you now have one term, here consisting of two factors, you need to always check whether those two factors cannot maybe factorize any further. In this case, they can't, so this is our completely factorized answer. Example 3. Factorize completely. Here we once again have four terms, but this time we do have a common factor in all four of them. So I'm going to start off by taking out 2 as a common factor. Inside this bracket we now have four terms, and I'm going to do grouping by once again putting the first two terms and the last two terms together. In the first group inside this bracket, the common factor will be 3p, and then I'll be left with p plus 2q. In the second group, the common factor is 2. But we already know that our aim is to get these two new brackets to look the same, and because both these terms, the first and second term of this second group, are minuses, I'm also going to remove a minus as part of the common factor. When I now divide the minus 4q by minus 2, I'm left with 2q, and when I divide minus 2p by minus 2, I'm left with plus p. If I now have a look on the inside of the block bracket, I have two terms that have a common factor, because p plus 2q and 2q plus p is exactly the same. So now, after I've removed 2 as a common factor, I can now also remove the p plus 2q as a common factor. Then I will be left with 3p in the first term and minus 2 in my second term. So here we started with four terms that we factorized into one term that consists of three different factors.